The table was set for joy. Then came death. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love hearing them. Wolfe unwraps the Christmas Eve mystery. If you've ever tried to explain to Nero Wolfe that Christmas isn't a federal holiday of the mind, you've got more courage than I have. For him, Christmas Eve is an obstacle to orchids and order. He doesn't despise it exactly. He just thinks it happens too close to dinner. At 7 minutes past 3 that afternoon, the brownstone was exactly as it should be. Wolfe was in the plant rooms inspecting something purple and impossible. Fritz was humming O Tannenbaum under his breath while arranging a plate of petit fours I wasn't allowed to sample, and I was in the office holding down my post as the token Protestant man of motion. Then the doorbell rang. Now, on any day that sound can mean money or misery, but on Christmas Eve it's mostly the latter. I opened the door to find a woman of about 40, dressed too formally for daylight and too well for desperation, standing in the snow like a misplaced ornament. Her gloves were pale gray, her eyes the same color but twice as sharp. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. Her voice had a kind of urgency that's been boiled down from fear to resolve. "I must see Mr. Wolfe." I told her the truth, an unpopular practice. "You must you? I should warn you there's a charge for must." She ignored that, stepped inside without waiting for the invitation I hadn't offered, and stood there dripping determination onto the rug. "My name is Margaret Sloane. My brother insisted I come." "Fine, brother," I said, hanging up her coat. "Mr. Wolfe doesn't usually receive before 4, but I'll see if I can disturb his orchids without endangering civilization." Before I went upstairs, I took a look at her hands. One glove was damp, the other was missing a button. Not the sort of thing you'd notice unless you'd spent too much time in Wolfe's employ, which I had. When I came back down, Wolfe had already entered, silently, like a ship easing into harbor. He took one look at the woman and sat behind his desk with the resignation of a man accepting the inevitable. "You have intruded upon my sanctum on a sacred date," he said. "It is Christmas Eve. I have no appetite for intrusion." She didn't flinch. "You will when you hear what's been taken from you." That got him. He leaned back, eyes narrowing just enough to register interest. "From me?" "Yes," she said. "This morning something was removed from your kitchen. Fritz doesn't yet know it's missing, but he will." I felt my eyebrows climb. "You came here to tell us we've been robbed? On Christmas Eve? Lady, we'd have noticed." "You will," she said softly. "It's a plate, a porcelain one, blue with a laurel border. You served on it last year." Wolfe's eyes closed for a full 5 seconds. When they opened again, they were steady and cold. "The Christmas Eve plate," she nodded. Fritz appeared in the doorway at that moment, holding a tray and looking puzzled. "Mr. Wolfe, sir, it is gone." And that's how the evening started, with a missing plate, a nervous lady, and the most sedentary man in New York turning his mind toward larceny. Fritz didn't enter with a tray, just his aggrieved dignity and the white ghost of flour on one cuff. He planted his hands on the door frame as if bracing the house. "It is gone," he said to Wolfe, not to me. "I went to take it down to polish. The space on the second shelf is empty, and there is—" He choked on it. "There is a paper plate in its place. A joke, a very bad one." I could have told him that humor never ages well in a kitchen, but Wolfe had the floor. He didn't budge an inch, but his voice moved half a mile. "Describe what you did after you discovered this obscenity." "I put the paper in the wastebasket," Fritz said with feeling. "I checked the pantry, then the scullery, the dumbwaiter, the drawers. I came here." He turned to the woman. "Who are you?" "Mrs. Sloane," Wolfe said before she could. "She anticipates our discovery. Confine yourself to facts, Fritz. Was the cabinet locked?" "As always, after breakfast. The key was in my pocket." Fritz tapped it, offended that pockets had failed him. There was no sign of tampering. Wolfe's eyes went to Margaret Sloane. Your assertion. She had herself under better control now that the worst had been confirmed. My brother told me it would be taken today, before dusk. He said whoever took it would leave something crude to prove a point. The point is that your control can be breached. Your brother has a sour taste in allies, I put in. Names help digestion. Alan Sloane, she said. He restores porcelain, private clients, often through dealers. He cleaned a hairline in your plate 18 months ago. Mr. Wolfe, he overheard a discussion 3 nights ago, a dealer's showroom. The man visiting asked if the Christmas Eve plate could be had quickly. He said there would be a premium for humiliation. Fritz made a sound that was 3/4 gasp and the rest fury. Wolfe raised a hand an inch and got silence. A premium, he repeated. Names. She looked down. The dealer is Gifford Blessing. His visitor is called Harlan Yu. Alan says Yu is a collector with money that always looks hurried. Wolfe turned his head toward me. Archie, the telephone. You will ask Mr. Blessing to present himself. Now, I asked. On Christmas Eve, when he is presumably busy counting premiums. Now, he said, if he is unwilling, we will adjust his appetite. Use the velvet first. I used the velvet. Blessing got the core with sugar on it. He was the kind of man who made his mouth sound upholstered. He tried to beg off, then realized the invitation wasn't a choice. If you've never heard a dealer rearrange his evening without moving his jaw, it's a festive treat. While I was at it, I put a line through to Saul Panzer and left a brief. Stand by. If you think that was premature, you haven't watched a kitchen lose a relic. When I turned back, Margaret had produced an envelope from her handbag and was sliding it carefully across Wolfe's desk. Alan gave me this in case I reached you too late. A description of the copy. Wolfe didn't touch it. Copy. Her lips tightened. The theft, he said, would not be raw. The plate would be replaced with a reproduction close enough to soothe a houseman's glance. Except the laurel border would be slightly out of true at the 12 o'clock mark, and the glazing would be new. A paper plate is an insult layered on top. Fritz, whose houseman's glance is a drill press, lifted his chin. I did not fail. Wolfe's eyes softened by a molecule. No, someone believes insult is leverage. He pointed at the envelope. Archie. I opened it. Alan Sloane had indeed written like a man who expects his words to be used in court. He described the original. Minton, late 19th century. Winter series. Laurel border, hand-painted with an almost invisible bend where the kiln warped during firing. The copy would miss the bend. There was also a note. If Yu wants it, he does not want it for himself. He will use it to move someone else. Fritz whispered, Move, Mr. Wolfe. Bah, Wolfe said. But it was soft. He will fail. The bell rang again, not with patience. I went and found a man with a chin like a pressed coin and an overcoat that had never been out of the city. Gifford Blessing had brought his respectability along, packed flat and ready to unfold. He nodded at me as if recognizing a colleague in the guild of polite annoyance, and came into the office with his hat in his hands. Mr. Wolfe, he said, dipping his head in his credulity. I understood you wished to see me. Most urgent. I do, Wolfe said. Sit. Do you know Mrs. Sloane? A micro-flash in Blessing's eyes said he knew the surname. He turned it into a polite blank. I've met an Alan Sloane. Her brother, Wolfe said. His ears are intact. He heard you negotiating for theft. Blessing tried to gather himself into a cushion. Good heavens. Mr. Wolfe, that is— Spare me your heavens, Wolfe said. I do not trespass in them. We will keep to earth. A plate has been stolen from my kitchen. You will tell me what Mr. Harlan Yu asked of you when he asked it, and how far you obliged him. You will do so without embroidery. Blessing looked at me. Then Fritz, as if hoping for a less lunar face, and found none. His shoulders slumped just enough to show he had bones. Mr. Yeo is a client. He asked about a certain plate. Several days ago, he inquired what it would take to obtain it within the week. He swallowed. I told him that the owner was not materialistic and that money would be secondary to spectacle. He enjoyed that. I declined to participate in anything illegal. Your refusal, Wolfe said, had a door left open. Blessing's mouth did something uncomfortable with the word door. I may have suggested that others, less scrupulous, could be enlisted. He said he already had a man for the mechanics. He wanted only an introduction to a potential buyer, if the prize could be obtained. Fritz made a wordless sound that translated to vulture. Blessing flinched. Names, Wolfe said. Harlan Yu, Blessing repeated, unhappy to be consistent. And the potential buyer, Mrs. Celia Caro. She writes about food and objects. She has a column. She likes gestures. He winced at the plural. I filed it. Celia Caro liked being noticed and had achieved it often enough to be a suspect out of habit. Blessing dabbed at his forehead with a handkerchief that looked as if it apologized when it was laundered. Address for Mr. Yeo, Wolfe said. Phone and Mrs. Caro's particulars. Blessing gave them with the resignation of a man realizing velvet had been a warning that leather existed. Wolfe nodded once. Very well. You have intruded. You may now contribute. You will telephone Mr. Yeo and tell him a duplicate has surfaced and that you must verify details. You will name this address. If he balks, you will apply what charm you have. Blessing said faintly. Tonight. Now, Wolfe said. Archie will listen from the extension. Blessing looked toward the hall as if it might take pity and become a corridor to a more forgiving life. It didn't. He rose, and I walked him to the phone. When he dialed, I took the kitchen extension and listened to the rings pull at a line somewhere in the city. On the fifth, a man answered with a voice like cold metal finding its fit. You? Gifford, Blessing said, shaking his charm like a nearly empty box. Change of plan. Another plate, closer to the mark, has appeared. I need you to see it. Tonight, 35 West 35th Street. There was a pause. Then, that's Wolfe's house. Blessing swallowed, audible. Yes. Another pause, longer, and something in it prickled the hair along my arm. All right, you said. I like the nerve. He hung up. Blessing turned to me like a man expecting a certificate of bravery and got my nod instead. When we went back to the office, Wolfe had not moved and the room felt smaller. Margaret Sloane sat very straight, counting her breaths or her sins. Fritz stood at parade rest, staring past the books to the kitchen where a hole had been cut in his world. He is coming, I said. Of course, Wolfe murmured. A man who pays for humiliation will not miss the performance. He let out a breath. Very well. We have our first audience. Our circle expands. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, the hunt had begun without his leaving the chair. When a man like Harlan Yu says, I like the nerve, you can expect two things. He'll show up, and he'll bring the kind of arrogance that thinks it's bulletproof. That gave Wolfe 2 hours, ample time by his clock to sharpen his intellect and my nerves. Wolfe didn't move from his chair, naturally. He issued instructions in a tone that could have sliced butter without melting it. Fritz was to serve no dinner until further notice. I was to prepare the field, which in Wolfe's dictionary means making the house look like a stage that forgot to apply for a permit. By 5 o'clock, the brownstone was half-lit and tense. The air had that thick, waiting quality I'd learned to recognize. Wolfe's mind at work, drawing invisible lines on a map no one else could see. Margaret Sloane sat where she'd been all along, her composure starting to chip at the edges. I had to admire her restraint. Most women who'd come in with a story like hers were either trembling or talking. She was neither. Mrs. Sloane, Wolfe said suddenly, without opening his eyes. This man you. Describe him. She blinked. He's sharp. Superficial charm, but not gracious. He collects things for their story value. He's rich enough to think meaning can be bought in porcelain. That last, Wolfe murmured, is the error of our age. She tilted her head. You don't approve of collectors? I approve of connoisseurs, Wolfe said. A collector wishes to possess. A connoisseur wishes to understand. When the collector cannot possess, he destroys. That was pure Wolfe philosophy, served cold, without garnish. But Margaret took it in, her jaw tightening. She understood him better than most. At 5:30, the bell rang. I got up, went to the door, and found exactly what I'd expected. A tall man in an overcoat cut too clean to belong to an honest day's work. His hair was black and ordered. His mouth was a horizontal question mark. Harlan Yu, he said, without offering proof or apology. Mr. Blessing told me Nero Wolfe wanted to show me something. He didn't bother with Christmas greetings. I stepped aside, keeping my hand near the edge of the door. Not that I thought he was packing, but because men like you like to test the frame. Inside, he gave the office a glance that swept past the books, the globe, the desk, and settled on Wolfe like a cat spotting a rival lion. Mr. Wolfe, he said, I've heard of you. Didn't believe you were real. You see, Wolfe replied, eyes half-lidded. Belief is not required for existence. Yu smiled, though it didn't touch his eyes. That's one way to put it. I hear you've misplaced something rare. Wolfe gestured toward the empty spot on the shelf. Misplaced is a euphemism. It has been taken. Then maybe it wanted a better home, Yu said lightly. Margaret made a small sound, a restrained fury that Wolfe's hand silenced before it escaped. I stayed standing behind you because I prefer suspects where I can see their shoulders. Blessing had come in with him and now hovered near the door like a coat that had lost its hanger. Wolfe folded his fingers together. Mr. Yo, your pleasure in transgression must have limits. Even a collector draws lines. Only practical ones, Yu said. If I wanted that plate, and I'm not saying I do, it's because you've made it valuable. You've made it an idea. People pay dearly for ideas. Indeed, Wolfe said. And how dearly did you pay Mr. Blessing for the introduction? That got a twitch. You make it sound sordid. It is sordid, Wolfe said calmly. A plate is not merely porcelain. It is the residue of thought. To take it from my kitchen is an affront both to appetite and order. I do not suffer affronts lightly. Yu's smile widened. Or maybe it's a lesson. Everyone needs reminding that nothing's untouchable. Not even you. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Who, then, sent you to teach me? Yu's silence was deliberate and smug. He turned slightly, surveying the room. I came to see what kind of man reacts to theft like it's an insult instead of a crime. That reaction, Wolfe said, depends on the thief's intellect. The silence that followed had weight. Fritz appeared briefly in the doorway with a tray of coffee because Fritz refuses to let civilization fall, even during interrogations. Wolfe ignored the cups. I decided to tip the scales. You're wasting charm, you. If you know who has it, you can start there. Wolfe won't chase you, but he will make you watch while someone else does. He turned to me with a look that had seen too many mirrors. And you're the someone else. Me, or a man better at following shadows than you are at casting them? Wolfe spoke softly. Enough, Archie. Mr. Yo is aware he's in the presence of reason, not force. Yu's eyes darted back. Then reason me out of this. You've got no proof I took anything. I don't need proof yet, Wolfe said. Only motive. You resent boundaries, you crave notoriety, and you mistake provocation for wit. You wanted to trespass where no one could, inside this house. The plate is a symbol, and you are a petty vandal of meaning. For the first time, Yu's composure flickered. It was quick, But there, the faint shift in his jaw, the heat under the eyes. He recovered fast. You talk like a priest with better vocabulary. Language, Wolfe said, is the only instrument of decency. You've misplayed it. The phone rang. I picked it up and heard Saul Panzer's even tone. Got a trace. You's been around Blessing's shop all week, but this afternoon he made a call to a woman named Caro, 47 East 70th, said he'd be delivering a piece of Christmas cheer. Understood, I said, and hung up. Wolfe had been watching me. Well, I nodded. Our man likes to spread goodwill, address and timing fit. Of course, Wolfe said, leaning back. The game proceeds. Mr. Yeo, you may go. You blinked. That's it? That is all. You've performed adequately. Archie will see you out. He hesitated, glanced at Margaret and gave her a small, poisonous smile before walking to the door. When it closed behind him, the room seemed to breathe again. Archie, Wolfe said, you will visit Mrs. Caro. Do not alarm her yet. Learn what she expects for Christmas. Gift receipt or confession? I asked. Both if you can, he said. Go. As I pulled on my coat, Fritz muttered something in German about desecration. Margaret stood, uncertain. Mr. Wolfe, he's dangerous. Yes, Wolfe said quietly, but not intelligent enough to be the mind behind this. He is an instrument, and instruments, Mrs. Sloane, can be played. I went out into the snow thinking about that. In this city, you can follow a lot of footprints, but the ones that lead away from the brownstone always start the same way, cold, sharp, and headed straight for trouble. Snow in Manhattan isn't romantic once it hits the sidewalks. It turns gray faster than good intentions and has the same chill as a lawyer's handshake. I stepped into it with my collar up and my mind doing laps around what Wolfe had just said. Instruments can be played. He meant you. But I had a hunch there was another musician in this orchestra, one that hadn't shown her face yet. And her name, if Saul's information held, was Celia Caro. Traffic on 35th was a slow, metallic hum, and the cabbie who picked me up had the kind of expression that said he'd long since given up expecting Christmas tips from the living. He dropped me at East 70th, a street with more good manners than warmth, and I stood outside number 47, which managed to look both exclusive and bored about it. Celia Caro's name was neatly printed on the buzzer, second floor. I pressed it. A woman's voice came through the speaker, low, cool, trained to sound unstartled. Yes? Archie Goodwin. Nero Wolfe's office. A pause. Short enough to be thought, but long enough to be strategy. Then, come up. The apartment was wide, elegant, and smelled faintly of jasmine and freshly edited sentences. Miss Caro herself was framed in the doorway of what looked like a study, wearing a soft gray sweater that could have paid my rent twice over. Her hair was dark gold, her smile perfectly symmetrical, and her eyes a little too calm. The kind of calm that knows its own power. Mr. Goodwin, she said, offering her hand like a museum artifact. To what do I owe the honor or intrusion? Depends which word you prefer, I said, taking the seat she indicated. Mr. Wolfe sends regards and curiosity. You've recently had dealings with a Mr. Harlan Yu. Her expression didn't shift. I've had dealings with many men, Mr. Goodwin. I write a column about culinary culture. Some of them even read it. Sure, you might not read it, but he's been quoting your name like a ticket stub. He claims he's making a delivery, something rare, something porcelain, something festive. At that, a flicker crossed her face, quick like the shadow of an idea she didn't want caught. He called, yes. Said he had an antique plate. An absurd offer, really, but he was persuasive. I told him I'd look at it tonight. Generous of you, I said. You always inspect stolen goods on Christmas Eve, or is this a special column? Her eyes sharpened. Are you accusing me of something? Not yet. Wolfe just likes to know who's rehearsing the solos before the orchestra plays. She tilted her head, the calm smile returning. Mr. Wolfe is an extraordinary man, but sometimes he mistakes drama for deduction. I haven't bought anything. I was curious, that's all. Mr. Yeo spoke as if the plate carried significance. Did he say whose plate it was? He said everyone in certain circles knew whose it was. I assumed he was exaggerating. Men like that always are. I took a slow look around the room. On one wall hung framed pages from old culinary magazines, faded menus, and a photograph of her shaking hands with someone who looked suspiciously like a senator's stomach. On a low table was a half-empty glass of white wine, untouched long enough to lose its chill. "Miss Caro," I said, "you strike me as a woman who likes stories more than things. Am I right?" "That's my business," she said simply. "Then here's one. A man steals a plate not because it's worth much, it isn't, but because it was used by someone who represents control, restraint, perfection. He doesn't sell it. He flaunts it. He shows it to someone who understands the symbol. That someone writes about indulgence, appetite, and the art of excess. You don't need to buy it. You just need to see it. That's what makes it valuable." She didn't answer. I could see the color drain a shade from her face, leaving only calculation behind. "If you're implying I encourage this theft, I'm not implying anything. Wolfe doesn't imply, he deduces. Me? I'm more of a collector of impressions. And right now, I'm collecting the impression that you knew about this before you called." Her voice dropped a note. "You're mistaken. He reached out. I've never met him." That was when the buzzer sounded again. 2 short rings. She looked startled for the first time. "Excuse me," she said, rising. I stood too, not that she invited me. She went to the intercom and pressed the button. A man's voice, muffled but unmistakably Hugh's, said, "Celia, it's me. I've got it. Let me in." Her hand froze. She turned slowly toward me. "You followed him?" "Not me," I said. "Let's just say Wolfe has a way of predicting entrances." She hesitated, then pressed the button. The outer door buzzed open. I moved to the side of the archway and stayed silent. When you entered the apartment, he carried a small package wrapped in a white cloth. He looked like a man on stage who just realized he didn't know his lines. "I brought it," he said. "Celia, you'll want to see this." Then he saw me. "You again." "Surprise," I said. "Let's unwrap Christmas." He backed a step, eyes darting from me to her. "You told him." "She didn't have to," I said. "You talk enough for both of you. Go ahead, show her." He hesitated, then unwrapped the cloth. Inside was the plate, Wolfe's plate, or something that had its genes. It gleamed faintly under the lamp. The laurel border looked perfect. Too perfect. I leaned in. The mark at 12 o'clock was missing. Alan Sloane had called it the counterfeit. "Nice," I said. "You even left out the imperfection. That's commitment." Hugh's jaw set. "It's worth twice the original." "She knows that." Celia turned on him sharply. "You idiot. You said it was authentic. I can't touch that. You've dragged me into—" He cut her off. "Relax. Wolfe won't go to the police. He never does. He'll want it back, that's all." I reached into my coat and took out a folded envelope Wolfe had slipped me before I left. Inside was a small card and a note in Wolfe's handwriting. "Observe the reaction to authenticity." I placed it on the table next to the plate. "This," I said, "was under the original. Fritz found it when he cleaned the shelf. A note from Wolfe to himself. Latin inscription, means possession breeds peril. You think he didn't expect this? You've both been playing a game he started before you walked in." Hugh's expression twisted, half anger, half disbelief. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I said. "Because right now Saul Panzer's outside in a car, waiting to follow whichever of you runs first. My bet's on you." He froze, then looked at Celia. Her eyes said she was through being a spectator. "Get out," she snapped. He moved toward the door, slower than he wanted to. I followed him out into the hall, let him get halfway down the stairs, then called after him. "Tell your employer the message was received, and next time he wants to teach Wolfe humility, he should try sending something edible." When I came back, Celia was sitting on the couch, staring at the fake plate like it might start confessing. "Tell Wolfe," she said finally, "that I didn't steal it, but I know who wanted it stolen." "Then you're 2 steps ahead of me," I said. "Start talking." She took a breath. "It wasn't you's idea. It was Alan Sloane's. My guess is your Mrs. Sloane doesn't know everything about her brother." And with that, the floor of the case shifted under my feet, and I realized we'd just found the next layer of the game, one that reached straight back to the brownstone. For a full 5 seconds, I didn't say anything. In my line of work, silence can be either a scalpel or a shield, and I was deciding which to use. Celia Caro had just dropped a statement that could rearrange the entire board, and she'd done it with the steady calm of someone used to controlling the temperature of a room. "You'll have to repeat that," I said, leaning against the mantel. "I could swear you just accused your porcelain restorer of masterminding a burglary." She nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the fake plate still sitting on the table. "You heard me correctly. Alan Sloane arranged this. Use his instrument, blessing his contact. He's the one who set the theft in motion. I didn't buy it yet, but I knew better than to say so. Why would Sloane, who fixes plates for a living, want to steal one? Because he hates Nero Wolfe," she said simply. "Or maybe what Wolfe represents." I kept my voice neutral. "You'll have to unpack that before I call the cops. Or Wolfe." She sighed, rubbed her temples, and began pacing slowly across the room, her heels clicking on the parquet like punctuation. "I wrote a profile 2 years ago, The Cult of Taste. It was about men who built reputations on refinement. Alan was one of my sources. He restored china for collectors who never touched what they bought. He admired Wolfe, idolized him almost. But then Wolfe refused to endorse him publicly. Alan had offered to authenticate one of Wolfe's pieces for a magazine feature. Wolfe declined, politely but firmly. To Alan, that was humiliation dressed as courtesy. "That still doesn't add up to theft," I said. "Grudge, sure. Petty resentment, maybe. But stealing a plate just to prove he could." "It's more than that," she said. "He wanted to prove Wolfe's sense of control could be punctured, that even the most self-contained man in New York could be made vulnerable. The missing plate wasn't about money, it was about desecrating the illusion." That word, desecrating, hung in the air like smoke. She meant it literally. For Wolfe, his kitchen was a temple, and Fritz its high priest. I studied her, trying to read how much of this was insight and how much was performance. "So what's your role in this passion play, Miss Caro? You brings you the counterfeit, and you just happen to know the backstory?" Her tone sharpened. "I didn't know the plate was stolen until tonight. You mentioned Wolfe's name, and that's when I started to suspect. I was curious, professionally. You might call it a reporter's instinct." "Or a collector's," I said. "You collect reputations. This would make a nice piece. The eccentric genius outwitted." She met my eyes, unflinching. "I don't write smear pieces, Mr. Goodwin. I write about appetite. Its forms, its follies. This whole affair reeks of it." I believed her about that much. Still, Wolfe would want verification before rearranging the blame. "All right," I said. "You've bought yourself the benefit of my doubt. But you'll need to come to the brownstone tomorrow and say all this to Wolfe yourself." "Tomorrow?" she echoed. "Christmas morning," I said. "He doesn't make exceptions for holidays or guilt." She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. I'll come." I called Saul from the hallway and told him to follow you, but not to spook him. Then I stepped back into the living room. Celia had rewrapped the counterfeit plate and handed it to me. "You might as well take this," she said. "It doesn't belong anywhere else." I thanked her, though it felt like thanking someone for handing me a loaded trap. Then I left, tucking the parcel under my arm. The snow had thickened into flakes fat enough to muffle the city. I walked instead of cabbing, partly to think and partly to delay the conversation I knew Wolfe was sharpening in his head. The street lights blurred, the windows glowed, and I wondered, briefly, how a plate could stir this much trouble. When I got back to the brownstone, it was a few minutes shy of 8. The lights were on in the office, which meant Wolfe was either waiting or fuming. The difference is mostly academic. I entered quietly, placed the wrapped plate on his desk, and took my chair. He looked up from his book but didn't speak. Fritz had retreated to the kitchen, probably mourning the loss of his culinary relic, and Mrs. Sloane had vanished, likely sent home. "Well?" Wolfe said finally. "She was cooperative," I told him, "and informative. According to Miss Caro, this wasn't you's game, so Alan Sloane set the cue. He wanted to humiliate you. Personal grudge inflated into philosophy." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Ah." That single syllable carried an orchestra of meanings. Satisfaction, irritation, and the faintest whiff of intrigue. "You are convinced?" "Let's say I'm convinced she believes it. She also claims you brought her the counterfeit tonight, and she was expecting him. I arrived first. She heard his voice, saw the plate, realized it was a fake. She tossed him out. Did you examine it?" I unwrapped the parcel and placed the plate in front of him. He leaned forward, just slightly, the most movement he'd made all day, and studied it. His eyes moved like slow machinery. "Alan Sloane's workmanship," he murmured. "The brushwork on the laurel border, the uniformity of glaze, meticulous but too perfect. No allowance for nature's imperfection. The man has technique without humility. Miss Caro said he resented your refusal to endorse his authenticity stunt," I said. "She thinks this whole performance is payback." "That would suggest obsession," Wolfe said. "And obsession, when left unguided, seeks witnesses. If this was Sloane's orchestration, there will be evidence of boasting. Men who build such spectacles must have audiences. You want Saul to dig up the encore?" "Yes, and you will locate Mrs. Sloane. She's probably home." "Doubtless, but she will not remain untroubled tonight. Call her, ask her to return at 10. I frowned. "You think she's involved?" "I think she is either the deceived or the deceiver. Either way, she must be present when her brother's pretense collapses." He poured himself beer from the side table, the bottle whispering as it tilted. "Archie, this man Sloane misjudged me. He assumes theft disconcerts me. It merely irritates me. The affront lies not in the act, but in its amateurism." That was Wolfe's version of anger, a philosopher's fury wrapped in vocabulary. At 9:45, the bell rang again. Margaret Sloane stepped in, wearing the same coat as before, but with her composure now cracked down the middle. Her eyes darted to the plate on Wolfe's desk. "You found it?" "Recovered, not found," Wolfe said. "But not the original. A reproduction, your brother's." She looked genuinely startled. "Alan's? No, that's impossible. He would never—" "Never?" Wolfe asked softly. "He anticipated the theft. He warned you. He supplied a description of the forgery before it appeared. That is omniscience, Mrs. Sloane, not coincidence." She shook her head. "He wanted to protect you. He overheard." "What he arranged," Wolfe said. Her lips parted, then closed again. Tears gathered, but they weren't the guilty kind. They were the kind that come from realizing your faith has been leveraged. Wolfe leaned back, steepling his fingers. "He will come here. He will come to see his triumph acknowledged. It is the nature of such men. Archie, when he does, you will admit him." "You expect him tonight?" I asked. "Before midnight," Wolfe said. Thieves of ideas are punctual on holidays. They believe symbolism strengthens the gesture. And as the snow kept falling against the brownstone windows, we waited, the fake plate gleaming faintly under the lamp, while the real thief drew closer to his own undoing. The clock on Wolfe's desk struck 10 with a dull, deliberate chime, the kind that insists time is a servant, not a master. Mrs. Sloane sat rigid on the red leather chair across from him, her gloved hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were colorless. Wolfe was motionless, except for his thumb slowly tracing the rim of his beer glass. The fake plate gleamed faintly under the lamplight, its perfection almost offensive. I was standing near the door, listening for footsteps on the walk. "You are certain," Wolfe said quietly, "that your brother has not been ill?" She blinked. "Ill? No. Why would you?" "Because arrogance of this sort," he said, "often grows from an infection of the mind. To imagine one can enter this house, manipulate me, and emerge unscathed. Such a conceit implies a fevered intellect." She flinched, not at his words, but at his tone. Cool, detached, yet not unkind. "Alan isn't mad. He's proud. But he wouldn't hurt anyone. Stop." Wolfe's voice had no volume, but it could halt a sermon. "He has hurt you. That is enough." She lowered her eyes. The silence that followed was as thick as the snow outside. I could hear the radiator hiss, Fritz's faint clatter in the kitchen, and Wolfe's slow breathing. At 10:30, the bell rang. It was a single press, firm, unhurried, confident. Wolfe looked at me. "Archie." I went, and when I opened the door, I wasn't surprised. Alan Sloane was what you might expect from a craftsman who handled fragile things. Delicate features, small, precise movements, and eyes that saw flaws before shapes. He was bundled against the cold, carrying a long, narrow parcel wrapped in brown paper. His face was pale, but his smile was composed. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I'm expected." "That you are," I said. "Come on in. The maestro's waiting." He stepped into the office with the air of a man entering a gallery to admire his own work. His eyes went straight to the desk. When he saw the counterfeit plate, his mouth twitched in what could have been amusement or regret. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does. But his gaze pinned Sloane as surely as a nail in cork. "Mr. Sloane," he said, "you've saved me the trouble of sending for you." Sloane set the parcel gently on the edge of the desk. "I thought you might prefer to hear my explanation before drawing conclusions." "I seldom draw conclusions," Wolfe said. "They arrive fully formed. You may, however, attempt to defend yourself." Sloane inclined his head. "I can see you've been misinformed. Yes, I created a duplicate, but I did so as a safeguard. I heard from a contact that there were whispers. Someone intended to steal your plate. I prepared the copy in advance so it could be substituted. The theft was inevitable, but at least I could minimize the loss." Wolfe's eyebrows lifted an imperceptible fraction. "An altruist in porcelain. Admirable," Mrs. Sloane gasped. "Alan, that's not what you told me." He turned toward her, his calm cracking at the edges. "Margaret, I spared you the details. I didn't want you frightened." Her voice rose. "You said you overheard the plot, not that you helped it." Wolfe interlaced his fingers and regarded them both as if examining an experiment's final stage. "Mr. Sloane," he said, "you claim you acted to preserve my possession. Yet your forgery found its way into the hands of Harlan Yu, who attempted to sell it to Celia Caro, a peculiar chain of custody for an act of protection." Sloane's composure faltered. "You betrayed me. I entrusted him with a copy to distract the thieves. He sold it instead. I should have foreseen it." "Should you?" Wolfe asked softly. "You're a craftsman, not a strategist, and yet you foresaw too much. You told your sister precisely what would occur and when. You even knew a mockery would be left in its place. That prescience, Mr. Sloane, does not belong to the betrayed." Sloane's hands clenched. You think I stole it myself? I think you arranged its removal, Wolfe said, and I think your purpose was not financial. You wished to prove that order, even mine, could be disrupted by ingenuity. You substituted your replica not to save me, but to display your superiority, to expose my supposed vanity in cherishing imperfection. Sloane's lips parted, then closed. A pulse jumped in his temple. That's absurd. You ascribe malice to what was art. Art, Wolfe murmured, without morality is vandalism wearing perfume. That did it. Sloane's calm shattered. You're an idolater of control, Wolfe. You treat beauty like a hostage. You lock it behind glass and call that appreciation. I wanted to free it. Margaret whispered. Alan, stop. He turned to her, face strained. Don't you see? The plate isn't the point. He lives in a shrine to restraint. I wanted him to feel what the rest of us do when we create. Risk, disorder, passion. I wanted to touch his untouchable world. Wolfe closed his eyes as if the room had become distasteful. Mr. Sloane, you have not touched my world. You have merely soiled your own. The words landed like soft lead. For a moment, Sloane stood motionless. Then he reached for the parcel he'd brought and unwrapped it. Inside was another plate, identical to the first, but with a faint, almost invisible flaw in the glaze. The original. I never intended to keep it, he said quietly. It was always meant to return here. I only wanted you to understand. Perfection is lifeless. Wolfe regarded the plate, then lifted his gaze. And you thought theft would animate it? Sloane's voice trembled. Sometimes desecration is the only way to prove devotion? I moved a step forward, but Wolfe gestured for stillness. You will leave the plate, he said. Archie will see that you reach home safely. After that, I will decide whether the police need to admire your philosophy. Sloane laughed once, bitterly. You can't prosecute an idea, Mr. Wolfe. No, Wolfe said, but I can expose one, and that is worse. Sloane stared at him for a long moment, then he turned to his sister. I'm sorry, he said softly. You wanted to save me. You should have let me fall. He set the plate down gently, as if it were a farewell, and walked out. The door closed behind him with a finality that made the air feel heavier. Margaret covered her face with her hands. Wolfe didn't speak for a while. Then he said, almost to himself, the man mistakes defiance for originality. The world is full of craftsmen who crave the authority of creators. He signaled to me. Archie, telephone Saul. Have him see that you and Blessing are informed the plate is recovered. They may now confess at leisure. I have no further use for them. I nodded, but before I left, I looked at him. You're letting Sloane go. For now, Wolfe said. The punishment of fools is best administered by conscience. It works longer hours than justice. Margaret rose shakily. Mr. Wolfe, thank you. I'll see to Alan. When she was gone, Wolfe poured the rest of his beer and stared at the plate. Archie, he said quietly, replace it in the cabinet. Let the laurel border face forward. Its curve, however slight, is essential. Nature tolerates only so much symmetry. I did as told. The shelf looked whole again, but the air in the room was different, as though some boundary had been stretched, tested, and reluctantly restored. Wolfe closed his eyes, and for once didn't look victorious, only weary. It was nearly midnight when Fritz brought in coffee. Outside, the snow had stopped. Inside, order had returned, but it had been touched by something fragile and unsettling, the reminder that even perfection, under the wrong hands, can be made to tremble. The next morning started the way most Christmas mornings do in the brownstone. Fritz humming carols in the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and butter turning the air into a holiday sermon, and Nero Wolfe pretending the calendar had skipped straight to the 26th. He was in the plant rooms by 8, which was early for him. Maybe even penance. I was at my desk, sorting through notes from the night before, trying to figure out whether we'd closed the book on Alan Sloane or just dog-eared it. The phone rang at 8:30. Fritz answered, then called me over with a tone that meant something unwelcome had just been delivered by wire. "It's Saul," he said quietly. "He asks for you." I took the receiver. "Morning, Saul. You sound too awake." "I've been up since 6, he said. "You told me to keep a loose tail on you. Well, it got looser. He's dead." That got me standing. "Repeat that." "Found an hour ago in his car, off East Houston, engine running, window half down, snow piling on the hood. Looks like he tried to start the heater and never made it past the fumes. But the cops are calling it suspicious. There's a bump behind the ear that doesn't match the story." I felt the shift, what Wolfe calls the tremor beneath the surface of logic. "Anything missing?" "Just his wallet," Saul said, "and a piece of porcelain, broken clean in two, sitting on the passenger seat." The line hummed while I took that in. "The counterfeit?" "Looks like. I'd say someone decided the performance had gone on long enough." "Stay with it," I told him, "and find out who called it in. Then call me back." When I hung up, Wolfe was standing in the doorway. You don't hear him approach. He arrives, the way conclusions do. "You?" he asked. "Dead," I said. "Carbon monoxide, maybe. But there's a fracture behind his ear and a broken plate-riding shotgun." He came in, moved to his chair and lowered himself like a man easing into a verdict. "That simplifies nothing," he said. "No," I agreed, "but it shortens the guest list." He didn't reply right away. The morning light hit his face at an angle that made him look carved, not living. Finally, he said, "You will call Mrs. Carow. She is to come here at 11, and you will find Mr. Alan Sloane again. This time, you will not let him speak first." I didn't argue. I called Celia Carow, who answered on the second ring, voice taut. "I was about to call you," she said. "There are police outside my building." "That's becoming a seasonal theme," I told her. "You's dead. Bring whatever you know, and be here at 11. She didn't ask how I knew. She just said, "All right," and hung up. By 10, I was in a cab heading toward the Sloane residence on 92nd, a quiet block where respectable guilt went to live out its old age. Alan answered the door himself, in shirt sleeves, looking pale and slightly hollow as if his night had been an argument with himself that he'd lost. "Mr. Goodwin," he said flatly. "I wondered when you'd arrive." "Then stop wondering," I said. "Get your coat. Wolfe wants you." He hesitated, glancing toward a small workshop behind him where half a dozen plates sat in various states of repair. "It's Christmas morning. Then you can add charity to your virtues," I said. "Come on." He didn't resist. On the ride downtown, he stared out the window, lips pressed tight, hands motionless on his knees. I didn't press him. Sometimes silence works like acid. It eats through faster than questions. When we reached the brownstone, Celia Carow was already there. She looked less composed than before, her elegance dulled by fear. Fritz ushered us in and retreated with the discretion of a man who knew civilization was about to take a beating. Wolfe's office was warm, orderly, and heavy with expectation. Wolfe was in his chair, the fake plate still on his desk beside its real twin. Margaret Sloane sat near the window, pale but resolute. When Alan entered, she rose halfway, then stopped. "Sit," Wolfe said. It wasn't a request. We all did. "Mr. Sloane," he began, "Harlan Yu is dead. That should concern you, though perhaps not surprise you." Sloane's eyes flickered, a brief loss of control. "Dead? How?" "Apparently by misadventure," Wolfe said. "But the world rarely. Misadventures without help." Alan swallowed. I haven't seen him since. Since last night." "That," Wolfe said, "is precisely when he died." Celia Carow drew a sharp breath. "You can't mean—" "I mean," Wolfe continued, that Yu's usefulness ended the moment his theft became public knowledge. He had served his purpose as a provocateur. Whoever engineered this affair wished to erase the evidence that it was ever more than mischief. I said, and that broken fake plate in Yu's car wasn't an accident. It was punctuation. Wolfe inclined his head slightly. Just so. The gesture of a perfectionist concluding his composition. Margaret looked between them, horror dawning. You're saying, Alan? I'm saying, Wolfe interrupted, that your brother built a mechanism too delicate for his own hands. He set it in motion, but others took it up. The copy, the theft, the insult, all that was his design. But Yu's death adds a new craftsman to the enterprise. Alan's voice cracked. No one else was involved. I made a mistake, that's all. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Then how did Miss Caro know of your grievance before you told it? And how did you learn of her interest if you did not mention it? Celia rose abruptly, color high in her cheeks. I told him. You came to me with the story of the plate and your reputation, Mr. Wolfe. I may have encouraged his curiosity, but I didn't know he'd gone to such lengths. Encouraged, Wolfe repeated. You're too modest. You flattered him, perhaps offered him the thrill of scandal. A man like you would risk anything for the illusion of intimacy, and Mr. Sloane, desperate for validation, supplied the means. Alan stood suddenly, trembling. Stop it! You twist everything. Sit, Wolfe said, and he sat. You conspired to demonstrate that I was fallible. Instead, you have demonstrated only that envy is circular. It devours its own cause. Mr. Yeo is dead because you needed an audience for your rebellion. The silence that followed was immense. Celia sank back into her chair, eyes wide, no longer defensive. Margaret covered her face again. Alan whispered, I didn't mean for it to happen. I only wanted recognition, Wolfe finished. Yes, the poor man's immortality. The phone rang. I picked it up. Saul's voice came through, low and dry. Cops found prints on the car door, not Yu's. They match a known journalist, Celia Caro. Thought you'd want to know before it hits the papers. I looked up. Wolfe was watching me. I gave him a slight nod. He sighed. Miss Caro, you may wish to speak now before the police arrive. Her composure snapped. He was threatening me, she burst out. He called after you left last night, said he'd tell everyone I'd helped him. I went to meet him. We argued. He tried to grab me. I pushed him. He fell. The rest was panic. Margaret sobbed quietly. Alan just stared at her, the betrayal landing slow and deep. Wolfe's voice was soft. A tragic symmetry. The thief undone by his accomplice, the accomplice by her vanity. Mr. Sloane, you may take your sister home. The police will handle the rest. Miss Caro, I suggest you prepare an honest account. Lies fatigue the soul. She didn't answer. The room seemed to exhale when she left. When the door closed, I turned to Wolfe. You could have stopped it last night. He nodded once. Perhaps. But human folly, Archie, like fermentation, cannot be rushed. One must allow it to mature before decanting. He leaned back, reached for his beer, and added quietly, and this vintage, I fear, was particularly bitter. Outside, the bells of St. Thomas were tolling 11. Inside, Fritz's Christmas roast was ready, and the brownstone, finally, mercifully, was still. The rest of that Christmas day unrolled like a long exhale after a storm. The police came and went, quiet and respectful, taking Celia Caro into custody without fanfare. Saul handled the coordination, his voice steady as ever. Alan Sloane and his sister left soon after, neither saying much. She held his arm, and he moved like a man who had been hollowed out and left to dry in the wind. Fritz cleared the coffee cups with silent reverence, and for once, even I didn't have a wisecrack handy. Wolfe spent the afternoon upstairs among his orchids, which was his version of confession. When he finally came down, It was after sunset, and he looked as though he had spent the day conversing with things that didn't argue back. He seated himself at his desk, opened the evening paper I'd placed there, and scanned the front page. The Caro arrest hadn't hit print yet, but it would by morning. He closed the paper, leaned back and said, "Archie." That was all, but it carried an assignment. I put down the crossword I wasn't solving and looked up. "Yes, sir. You disapprove." "Of what?" "Of my restraint," he said. "You would have had me summon the police last night, before blood cooled." I shrugged. "Would have saved you a rough morning, that's true. But you don't hire me for my optimism." He nodded once, slow. He was doomed the moment he lent himself to Sloane's vanity. I could no more have prevented it than you could prevent snow from falling. It is the nature of gravity. "Still," I said, "it's a nasty way to make a point." He reached for his beer and poured it, the foam rising lazily. Mr. Sloane sought to unmask me as a man who worships perfection. In doing so, he revealed himself as one who mistakes imperfection for freedom. Miss Caro mistook manipulation for artistry. They were, as ever, complementary failings. I watched him take a slow sip. "You're in rare form tonight. Philosophical but not hungry. That's a first." "On the contrary," he said, "I am famished, but Fritz insists the roast must rest before carving, as should we." The silence stretched, filled with the kind of stillness that only the brownstone can manufacture. Outside, the snow had begun again, gentle this time, the city muffled to a whisper. Inside, the lights glowed warm, the air fragrant with thyme and slow-cooked justice. After a few minutes, I said, "You think the cops will buy her story?" "They will," Wolfe said, "because it requires no imagination. A quarrel, a push, panic, an exhaust pipe. So mundane it must be true. The police, Archie, are fond of simplicity. They distrust the ornamental." "And Sloane?" "He will live," Wolfe said, "and that will be punishment enough. The man has achieved what he most feared, irrelevance. He can restore no object now without seeing his own flaw mirrored in the glaze." There was something almost merciful in his tone, but I didn't say so. Wolfe's pity is rarer than his movement and less predictable. At 7, Fritz called us to dinner. The table was set with subdued ceremony, roast capon, pomme dauphinoise, a chestnut puree that smelled like autumn remembered too late. Wolfe ate in silence, except to remark, midway through, "Fritz, the rosemary was precisely judged," which, in Wolfian language, was the culinary equivalent of a standing ovation. After dessert, he returned to the office with his coffee and brandy. I followed with my notebook, though he hadn't asked. The fire crackled, and the shadows climbed higher up the walls. "Archie," he said at length, "you will write this one up, though I expect no publication." "Too small?" "Too human," he said. "There was no grand design, no fortune gained or lost. Only an experiment in pride, and pride does not sell well without embellishment." I leaned back. "You know, you almost sound disappointed." "Not disappointed," he said. "Resigned. Crime at its root is always the same. A man seeks to impose his will on the order of things. Sometimes he succeeds for a moment, then the moment decays, and order reasserts itself." He gestured vaguely toward the cabinet where the plate had been restored to its perch. "Like that?" I studied him for a minute. "You sure you're talking about Sloane?" He gave me one of those half-glances that could cut marble. "I'm talking about the world, Archie. Do not make it smaller than it is." I grinned. "You make it sound like you're defending the universe one dinner plate at a time." He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Perhaps. Civilization, after all, begins with the table." That line hung there, good enough to end a book on, but he wasn't done. He reached into the drawer, pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to me. It was the note Fritz had found beneath the plate, the Latin one. "Possessio periculum perit." Possession breeds peril. Abvorhase, translated. You think you jinxed yourself. I think, he said quietly. I reminded myself. He set the empty cup aside. There are men who seek dominion over others, and men who seek dominion over things. Both are dangerous. I prefer dominion over myself, though it is the most precarious of all. He rose then, slow but steady, and moved toward the dining room. The motion was almost shocking in its rarity. You may lock up after midnight, he said. Tomorrow we begin anew. After he left, I sat alone for a while. The fire dimmed, the snow thickened, and the brownstone seemed to settle back into its rightful state. Order restored, appetite pending, silence triumphant. I looked at the cabinet, the faint gleam of the Minton plate catching the firelight. It sat there, perfect again, as if none of it had happened. But I knew better. Wolfe was right. Every possession carries its peril. Even peace. Especially peace. When I finally turned off the lights and climbed the stairs, the city outside was blanketed in white, the kind that makes everything look new. Inside, Nero Wolfe slept soundly, and for once, I didn't envy him. Because somewhere under that polished serenity, the mind was already working, cataloguing human folly, polishing it like porcelain, and waiting for the next tremor to disturb his perfect world. The following morning was grey and brittle, the kind of winter dawn that doesn't so much rise as creep in. The city was a field of frost, soundless under its crust of snow. Inside the brownstone, though, life went on with its usual precision. Fritz at the stove, me at the typewriter, Wolfe in the plant rooms where the orchids inhaled their measured share of warmth. The newspapers had already picked up the story. Socialite journalist held in holiday tragedy. They called it an altercation, which is what people call murder when they're wearing gloves. There were pictures. Celia Carrow's sharp eyes turned blurry in the flash. Alan Sloane's pale face caught behind his sister's hand. The press loved the contrast, beauty and intellect undone by pride, with Nero Wolfe's name tucked discreetly between the lines. He hated that kind of attention. At 9, the phone rang. Wolfe had just come downstairs, moving slowly, and paused by his desk. I took the call. It was Inspector Kramer, sounding like a man chewing gravel. "Goodwin," he said, "tell your boss I'd appreciate a few words about the Carrow case." "Appreciate or demand?" I asked. "Don't push me, Archie. There are holes in this story big enough to drive a patrol wagon through. That woman's statement doesn't square with forensics." I glanced at Wolfe. He'd settled into his chair and was watching me, eyes half-lidded. "You mean you didn't just fall asleep on his good intentions?" "Cut the wisecracks," Kramer said. "There's bruising inconsistent with a fall, and no fingerprints on the exhaust. Control, none. Either she wore gloves or she wasn't alone. I want Wolfe's theory, if he's got one." "He's always got one," I said. "But you'll have to come collect it." 15 minutes later, the doorbell announced him. Fritz let him in, and the cold came with him. He stomped the snow off his shoes, shook out his hat, and glared at the room like it owed him an apology. "Morning, Wolfe," he said. "Nice, quiet holiday you had." "I detest holidays," Wolfe said without looking up. "They encourage sentimentality and indigestion." Kramer grunted, took the red chair, and pulled out his notebook. "Let's skip the theology. I came because your name's floating around this mess. You were consulted before the theft, involved during it, and now you're sitting on the sidelines while one corpse and 2 confessions fight for attention." "I'm not sitting," Wolfe said mildly. "I'm contemplating. There's a difference." "Then contemplate out loud," Kramer snapped, "because this Carrow woman's story stinks." I leaned forward. "She says you tried to blackmail her. She pushed him. He fell and she panicked." "Yeah, well," Kramer said, "blackmail usually leaves a paper trail. So far, we've found nothing. And get this, His car's ignition was still warm when the first patrol showed up, but there were no keys in it. Someone took them, maybe to make it look like suicide. That hung there for a second. Wolfe's eyes opened a shade wider. "Ah," he said softly. "So the play continues." "What play?" Kramer barked. "The unfinished composition of Mr. Alan Sloane," Wolfe said. Yu's death was his epilogue, but not his conclusion. Kramer scowled. "You think Sloane did it? We already cleared him last night. He was home." "Home," Wolfe repeated, "where a man of his skill can reproduce anything, including an alibi." Kramer slammed his notebook shut. "You better start making sense." Wolfe shifted, which in his case is practically a dramatic gesture. "Mr. Sloane's grievance was never against me alone. It was against invisibility. He wanted recognition, validation, immortality, whatever word you choose for hunger that masquerades as principle. Miss Caro's death will not end that hunger. It will deepen it. If you examine Yu's effects closely, you may find evidence that someone continued his correspondence, or fabricated it, to ensure the narrative remained incomplete. Mr. Sloane is too precise a craftsman to leave symmetry unbroken." Kramer glared. "You mean he'd kill to perfect his own scandal?" "Not kill," Wolfe said. "Cure it." Kramer muttered something about psychiatrists and got up. "Fine, we'll check, but if this turns into another one of your moral essays, I'll—" "Save your breath," Wolfe said. "You'll call me by evening." When the door closed behind him, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes again. "Archie, phone Saul. Have him trace the route between Sloane's house and Houston Street. Note whether any cameras or witnesses observed movement between 2 and 4 a.m. I made the call, and Saul promised to report within hours." Wolfe spent the rest of the morning dictating notes, short, precise, surgical. By noon, the office smelled of ink and orchids, and the city's hush outside felt like the pause before revelation. At 3, Saul called. "Got something," he said. "Security camera on a loading dock near Bleecker. Around 2:45, a sedan matching Sloane's make and model parked there for 10 minutes. Only one figure got out, but it's fuzzy. He's carrying something under his arm, about plate-sized. After that, he heads north on foot." "That's enough," I said. "Meet Kramer, feed him the grain, and tell him the farmer's name later." When I relayed it, Wolfe opened his eyes, satisfied but unsmiling. "So," he murmured. The craftsman went back to inspect his work. "Why risk it?" I asked. "Because control is an addiction," Wolfe said. He had to ensure that even his failure was executed correctly. At 7 that evening, the bell rang again. This time it was Kramer, snow still clinging to his coat, with Saul right behind him. The inspector's face was tight with triumph and fatigue. "You were right," he said. Sloane cracked. "We found the car keys in his workshop. He said he only wanted to make it clean, whatever that means. We've got enough to hold him." "Then hold him gently," Wolfe said. "He is fragile, though not innocent." Kramer grunted, turned, and left with Saul. When the door closed, Wolfe reached for the phone and dialed. "Fritz," he said. "The Duc Terrine, if you please, and the Montrachet. Civilization must resume." I looked at him across the desk. "You're not even surprised." He met my gaze, expression faintly wistful. "Surprise, Archie, belongs to youth. Understanding belongs to appetite, and I am too old and too well fed for surprise." He lifted his glass when Fritz brought it. "To the craftsman," he said quietly. "He sought to defy perfection and became its proof." That night, as I wrote the final notes for the case file, I thought about the line Wolfe had recited days before. "Possession breeds peril." It did. For Sloane, for Caro, for you. And maybe in smaller doses, for Wolfe himself. Because every case that entered that brownstone took a piece of him too, chiseling at the edges of that perfect order he built like a fortress. When I finished typing, I turned out the light. The city outside had thawed just enough for the streets to gleam again, and inside, the brownstone was silent, intact, serene, and waiting. Waiting, as always, for the next quiet disturbance to test the man who refused to move. The last of the snow melted 2 days later, leaving the city raw and slick, as if it had been scrubbed too hard. Inside the brownstone, everything was back in its place. Fritz had restored the kitchen to order, the orchids resumed their calendar of devotion, and Wolfe was again in his chair, sealed into his habits like a philosopher in amber. I was at my desk, typing up the case for the records Wolfe pretends not to keep. He had declared the matter closed, but closure in this house is just a polite word for exhaustion. The air was too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes after justice has been served, but before anyone's appetite returns. Wolfe broke it with a sigh that might have been satisfaction or irritation. "Archie," he said, "we have, I think, achieved equilibrium again." "Equilibrium's fine," I said, "as long as it doesn't come with another corpse." He ignored that. The world mistakes noise for vitality. It forgets that stillness is the only condition in which truth can be observed. I swiveled in my chair. "You sound like a monk with better table service. But tell me something, did you ever feel, even for a second, that Sloane deserved pity?" He was silent a long time. Then, softly, "Pity, yes. Sympathy, never." He sought to prove that order could be mocked, but order is patient, Archie. It reclaims everything, even him. That was Wolfe in full bloom. Philosophy disguised as digestion. I didn't press. I'd learned long ago that when he reaches for the eternal, it's because he's finished with the temporary. A knock came from the hallway. Fritz appeared with the afternoon mail on a silver tray. "2 letters, sir, both hand-delivered." He set them down like evidence. Wolfe opened the first. It was from Kramer, a short note confirming that Alan Sloane had been committed for observation instead of prosecution. The district attorney had agreed he was more broken than guilty. Wolfe read it, folded it, and slid it under the blotter. The second envelope was smaller, cream-colored, with handwriting delicate enough to belong to regret. Wolfe hesitated, then passed it to me. "You may." I opened it. Inside was a single page. "Mr. Wolfe, you were right. He will live, but not whole. Thank you for leaving him that much. Please know he spoke of the plate before they took him away. He said it was never meant to insult you, that it was meant to free you from your own perfection. He said you would understand. Margaret Sloane." I handed it back. Wolfe read it twice, his expression unchanged. Then he said, "It is a foolish kindness to assign nobility to vanity, but she will need it. Let her keep it." He dropped the letter into the drawer and reached for his beer. The motion was almost ceremonial. "Fritz," he called, "lunch." While Fritz disappeared kitchenward, I looked at the cabinet again. The Christmas Eve plate sat on its shelf, gleaming faintly under the soft light. It had survived theft, imitation, desecration, and 2 deaths. It looked exactly as it had before, but I couldn't see it without remembering the snow, the fear in Margaret's eyes, the tremor in Alan's hands, the calm calculation in Celia's. Beauty always keeps its scars hidden where only the guilty can see them. "Wolfe," I said finally, "I've been thinking. Maybe Sloane wasn't wrong, in his own twisted way. You do keep things too perfect around here. Everything in its slot, every thought sealed in its jar. Maybe that's what drew him in. He wanted to see what happens when something moves that isn't supposed to." He regarded me with one raised brow. "If you're suggesting I should cultivate disorder as a prophylactic, you're wasting your breath." "Just saying," I replied. "Even perfection gets lonely." He made a sound halfway between a snort and a laugh. Rare currency from him. "Nonsense. Perfection is its own company." Then, after a pause, softer. "But I concede that even order occasionally requires a reminder of its fragility." That plate has served its purpose. Fritz reappeared with lunch. Roast goose sandwiches on brioche and a pot of coffee strong enough to power Brooklyn. Wolfe inhaled deeply, his mood lightening by visible degrees. "Ah," he said, "now civilization resumes." I poured the coffee and sat. "So that's the moral. Civilization survives because we can still eat after murder?" "The moral," he said, cutting into his sandwich with surgical precision, "is that appetite, properly governed, redeems the ruinous impulses of man. The rest is commentary." That sounded like the end of the sermon. He ate in silence, and I let him. Outside, the light shifted through the window, grey to silver, silver to gold. The city was thawing, the streets coming alive again. When the plates were cleared and the coffee was gone, Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed, fingers tented. "Archie," he murmured, "next year, remind me to spend Christmas in Montenegro." "You'd hate it," I said. "Too much disorder." He grunted, which meant agreement disguised as contempt. "Then perhaps I shall simply bar the door." "You tried that this year," I reminded him. "The door rang anyway." He smiled faintly without opening his eyes. "Then the door, like humanity, is incorrigible. Very well. Let it ring." And just like that, the case of the Christmas Eve plate was over. Not with a confession or applause, but with the quiet clink of china and the slow return of calm. Outside, the world kept moving, imperfect and unrepentant. Inside, Nero Wolfe sat among his orchids, immovable as ever, his order restored, his appetite intact, and the sanctity of the brownstone, at least for now, unchallenged once more. I turned off the light, leaving him in the soft amber glow of the room. The snow had stopped, but the air still held its memory. As I closed the door, I thought about the plate gleaming on its shelf, a circle unbroken, fragile and whole again. And about the man who'd guarded it not for beauty's sake, but for the stubborn belief that somewhere between appetite and reason, there's still a shape worth keeping.